Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Ken Long from Kansas and my good friend Jens Larson from Copenhagen. And it's very, very early here. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. Ridiculous. There's only two or three people that I would get up that early in the morning to talk to, and Jens is one of them. So we've warmed up with 20 minutes of football and the misery of Man United. So we're in a proper state of mind, pain and suffering, in order to get into protreptic. So I want to welcome my friend Jens. How are you doing, buddy? Hey, tell me about that course, the protreptic master course you did at Aalborg University. I'm interested in that because I want to steal some of those ideas if we can. How are you doing?
Fine, Ken, and it's always good to see you. And I'm here in Copenhagen, and as you know, it's evening here in Copenhagen. We will do this protreptic course, and Monday I was at Aalborg University teaching, doing a master class for 25 leaders from public organization, also some private, and actually also from the Danish army and police. And The way I do it, just to say some very briefly about it, is that I introduce the concept, and as you know, it's a very, very old concept. It's from ancient Greek. It was inspired by Plato, but put into a more as a concept. Aristoteles on the island of Cyprus, and it was a way to educate leaders who are strong ethical leaders, who can go out there and act from ethical values instead of feelings and stuff like that, envy and I introduce why this concept is so important for leaders today. One thing is, of course, also that they can act from ethical, they can act from the ethics, from value instead of feelings, and that's a way actually to prevent them getting burned out and stress, because they have, you can say, some foundation in their life. And then I go into the dialogue, the principles behind the dialogue, and how to do these protreptic coaching, what kind of question, how to be in the conversation, what to be aware of. And after they have some basic and they have trained, I try to transform this into how can they use it in their own organization. It can be with a team, it can be in workshops around values, how to implement values in the organization, but also how can they use protreptic coaching on their own life. How can they implement it through writing exercise, this essay genre, which also is a genre which is grounded in the ancient Greek, but later on in the Renaissance, as a way to reflect on values and concepts. And somehow people get, I think they get always very, I don't know if a word is right, they get always touched about it, because it's about values which is really important for them. So although it's a part of an education, this day I know from early experience that they often end up writing their thesis about protreptic in some cases in their organization. So it gets not only to their head but into their heart, because it's about them and it's about what is most important in life and also as a leader. So that was a long story,
Yeah.
Ken, but
Oh, is that all that it was? Well, that seems simple enough. You know, um, well, I prepared for today. You know, we have been gently starting this ball rolling, you know, over a month ago. And you'd sent me some good background material to get me started, and that launched me into the literature. And so I've been sniffing around in I read, you know, the first chapter of the new Protreptic by Kirkaby and yourself. With some additional follow-ups in some of the source materials, you know, the other footprints of Protreptic in the world. And at the same time, I have a parallel process where I'm looking at professional coaching through the lens of the US Army. And we're trying to do that in two ways. I'm concerned about being a better coach for my students while they're attending the college to become an organizational leader. So I want to be the best coach that I can be for them while they're here. I also want them to be a coach in their organization when they get there. So it's not enough just to coach them. I'm also concerned about teaching them how to coach. And so as I started unpacking that, there's a lot of ways that coaching manifests in the world. The Army has a traditional coaching model, and we lump that into a trilogy, teach, coach, and mentor. And so that has, you know, those three roles. It sounds really good in your head, and it feels like it encompasses, you know, the variety of human experience. You know, teacher we think of as the deliverer and certifier of skill. I teach you, you learn, I certify that you have learned. You can now go do that in the world. Well done. Technical. So teach, coach, and mentor. Now, the other end, mentoring, has a different connotation than coach. As we understand it, the mentor is a voluntary relationship between the mentor and the mentee, in which they both agree that we want a relationship that helps us understand the socialization of the lived experience of our profession. So when you're being a professional in the world, and it so happens that your profession has been granted the authority to use legalized violence on behalf of the nation under certain very controlled circumstances, that professional obligation to be correct, to be proper, to be value centric, in the sense of limited war, rules of engagement, the laws of land warfare, it's always and should always be a last resort. I don't know that it always is, but on behalf of the nation, they've invested in this very, what a person on the outside look at as sort of a primitive way of being in the world, one that is centered around violence, and yet no soldier genuinely wants violence. So that automatically puts you into a tension-filled environment as a military leader. And you have a responsibility to take your nation's young people and train them to be disciplined, skillful, ready, ethical, soldiers. And if called upon to do so, to make the ultimate sacrifice, was what they signed up for, and to engage in mortal combat. So that's non-trivial. That's a pretty important statement of the profession with respect to society. So you can imagine how someone who grew up in the Western civilization, or in the world, and is a decent, thoughtful, heart-centric human being that loves a fellow man, that places you in under tension all the time when you come face to face with the demands of the profession. And so how to deal with the stress, the performance of that duty as you begin to rise through the ranks, to not only be a trainer and a leader of soldiers, but also to become responsible at the organizational level using indirect power and leadership where you're trying to influence thousands of people. That role of the organizational leader is still very strongly connected to values. So at our college, when we're working with organizational leaders and they are transitioning from direct action leaders, a performer, into an organizational leader responsible for the care and feeding and leadership of large organizations, those are not easy skills, habits, points of view to take on. So the mentor, I say all that simply to say the mentor relationship, that voluntary relationship between a senior leader and a junior leader that they both voluntarily agree to, it's an informal one. And it allows the socialization of some of these values-centric discussions to occur in a privileged space of trust and personal development. So it is very strongly connected to your values. So if I'm trying to figure out how to develop an annual training budget, I don't go to my mentor. I go to my teacher. Hey, teach me how to do a budget. Okay, thank you. If I want to learn how to do a budget better, maybe I can go to a coach. But the mentor relationship is one that's very special. So we have this framework of teacher, coach, and mentor. And so when I first put together the title for this course and called it Protreptic Coaching, and then started reading your work and Kirkaby's work, I realized, oh, that was poorly chosen words in some ways, because the protreptic relationship, in my view, is now much more closely aligned with the idea of the mentor than it is the coach who is skilled in the performance of that technique and is doing performance coaching to help you improve your skill. Hey, you're not a very good receiver of the soccer ball. Your first touch is bad. So I'm going to coach you through a program of improved performance in the game. So in that sense, the idea of the coach is one who actually knows something and is imparting wisdom. And as I dig deeper into protreptic, my understanding now is that the protreptic guide, I think is a better name, is deliberately and intentionally not taking that role. But much like Diogenes from ancient Greece with his lantern in search of an honest man, he's holding up a light of dialogue to help the partner explore that inner space around values, to gain different perspectives through the skilled offering of good questions with accountability and clarification. So it's very much iron sharpening iron in an honest, open, deep level discussion to help the person being guided or coached, if I can say it that way, to discover what it is that they're actually saying about the thing that they're feeling or exploring. So it, and as my understanding is now, the protreptic does not dictate, well, here's how you should be in the world. It deliberately does not cross that line. And so to call our course Protreptic Coaching, I'm going to have to go back and put this in parentheses, because this is a very different and fundamental difference from what we would normally think of as athletic coaching, business coaching, life skills coaching. That is, that you see that everywhere in contemporary society. But we've lost some of that, in the transactional nature of our life in the world. Um, I don't know that we're getting to those fundamental value centric things that in less busy times people were centrally concerned with. Maybe we've allowed our life to become so full of transactions and digital feeds and advertising and marketing. Go to the next thing, that it's very easy to stay out of the depths and to swim on the surface and everything's fine. But at some point, there's that nagging feeling that there's some depths that I need to explore, those fundamental values that are affecting me in my life. And so it feels to me, in conclusion, what I want to say then is, based on your writings and then the Kirkeby writings, I thought those really were meticulous in helping me understand what protreptic is not, in order to understand what it is, and what those fundamental limits and roles and relationships are. So that's what I want to just check with you before I go further off the deep end and say, that's kind of where I am right now in my appreciation of the protreptic. And I'm actually having one of my Army students who is examining the Army coaching model. She's touching the whole idea of the mentorship program and helping us understand that very clear difference between coaching and mentoring. And I'm using protreptic principles with her to help her understand that important distinction inside of our profession. Because as hard as this is to explore your own values, now to have the presumption that I'm going to establish a set of values across the whole organization. Wow, that is that touches the issues of individual liberty and being directive about values. But I want to finish up now by saying my earlier discussion of the professional setting of the military demands that you align yourself with the organizational values to ensure that the profession is meeting its obligations to the society as part of that social construct. And that has to be absolutely understood and supported, so that if you discover that your personal values can no longer align with the organizational values, it's time for you to leave. The organization, either you have moved away from the organization, or the organization has moved away from you. But if you're going to be in the organization, you must espouse those values, or you have an obligation to part ways. So that was the wider context that I wanted to talk about here. There's some other things that I want to explore later on in the course, where I talk about the relationship of me and my business as a provider of retirement investing advice or education to people to protect them against modern rapacious capitalism. But I want to keep those two lines of operation separate. There's certainly some shared values and obligations, that professional sense of responsibility is part of both of those. But I want to keep a clear distinction between those two bodies. And so anyway, that's where I am sort of on lesson one. What is protreptic, what is coaching, what is mentoring, and I touched on some of the values that are uppermost in my mind, and I want to relinquish the microphone.
Yeah, and there are, some I don't know, some internet. Your microphone is a bit scratchy sometimes, just as you know. But thank you for sharing this. And if I should comment on this, I think that if you compare Protreptic to other coaching approaches, I think one thing is that we have focused on the values and on the core concept, and you can say that the dialogue is not about private stuff. It's not about examples and stories. It's more an approach where you explore a concept or a value which is important for you. So that's one thing, and you can also say that a protreptic coaching has not a goal, like a kind of a wrap up. It stopped when it stopped, and then because the whole idea is to, as you said, in our life, very busy life, we are often on the surface, and we use also in organization a lot of buzzwords. It can be innovation, it can be uh, trust something, but very often we discuss it on the surface, and I think a very good image for the protreptic coaching is the iceberg, where in our busy life, organization life, we only touch the top of the iceberg, but the whole thing about protreptic is actually to come deep down and to explore the whole iceberg somehow.
Mm.
And in that sense, it is a kind of embodied experience talking about these values. And the word protreptic means to turn somebody to the important things in life. So it's about turning people to what is important. And one of the most important thing I see about the protreptic is actually to learn how to be aware of what is important and what is less important. That's a big thing. And another thing that you mentioned was, how can we build a bridge between our own personal values and the values of the organization? And perhaps just a few words about this whole idea about why this work in the protreptic approach to coaching. We look at the self, and it can be the self of a human being, about me and you, or it can be the self of an organization. We look at it as a organization of values, and it's not fixed, like this is the same values over time, but the whole idea is, if the self are inside of us, inside the organization, values, and if we spend time putting light on these values, exploring them, then we create a lot of meaning out there. And meaning means that people can somehow act from these values, and they get inspired somehow. And the whole idea is that the protreptic coaching is also to prepare yourself for the event somehow. So to actually spend time having these very deep conversation where you explore values, you prepare yourself. So when you're out there, I don't know, I'm not a soldier, but it can be a leader. You can act, from some of these values instead of from orders from the outside. You have them inside yourself. I know this is quite ambitious, but that's was the whole idea. So it's a concept which is developed for the army, back in ancient Greek, um, and it's always not what is good. It's both about what is good for you, for your organization, and for society. So it's in I think that's also interesting that it was developed as a way, to actually lead an organization and societies, and to create commitment.
Yeah, my sense is that in the ancient times, there may have been so few checks and balances on the leader of a city state or at the head of an army that if there were to be any accountability for that leader, it was going to come from inside because nobody else would have the standing or the power or the authority to say, no, listen to me. So developing that inner sense of accountability and consistency to the values filled an important need for someone who proposed to lead according to values. I think that's one of the things that the Greeks contribute to
Yeah,
the world.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and 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 I think in our life, which can be very complex too, um, I think it's important to have these, values as a kind of a compass too. You can act from, or who can lead you on the right path. Um,
Well, yeah. Interestingly to me, in another dimension of my life, I'm studying chaos theory and leadership decision making under chaos.
mm,
And chaos is a condition in which we cannot fully calculate all of the choices and all of the possible outcomes. And so there's no mathematical certainty to deciding what to do. In the true storytelling tradition, for example, that's the Tamara experience that you and David Boji and the team showed us. That when you put together even a modest number of people and different points of view, the possible combinations of insight and observations and sense making are astronomical. So it
mm,
turns out that when you're trying to lead an organization through chaos, you have to adopt a different mindset that says that is value centric is the most current thinking in that area. That since you can't compute everything anyway, that you're best off trying to align your decisions in support of the values that you espouse and just do your best and then learn how to adapt as the world changes around you. Stay true to your values and then adjust your behaviors as you learn your way forward through the fog. So the importance of values now more than ever. I mean, there was a time in the 1800s and the 1900s, in the scientific Descartes rational man, where there was this belief that we could be fully mechanistic and we could plan everything. And sort of that has demonstrated that that doesn't work. So this reconnection to values at the organizational level now, I think, is coming back to the individual level, as there's a lot of evidence that the younger generations, the younger generations are more concerned about their search for meaning and value, spiritual value, than necessarily their materialism. Now, there's certain materialistic features in the world, but the younger generations are hungry for an examination of values. They feel that need. Well, let me shift to gear. The two words that came up to me as you were describing leaders were the values of duty and identity for me. That's what came immediately to my consciousness. Duty doesn't surprise me because when I do my values clarification exercise 30 years ago and then repeat it every year, duty to others is always the thing that rises to the top of my stack. Like I make a list of values and I compare them and see which one, if it came down to choosing between this one and that one, which one would I choose? It turns out that for me, duty to others always wins. Higher than happiness, love, success, fame, fortune, prestige, reputation, all those things. Duty to others turns out to win. So that didn't surprise me that came to the surface. But the other one that came with it was identity. And I'm beginning to now say, all right, the sense of duty comes with it, duty to others, which means I now have at least two elements to contend with. It's the duty of one to the other. In this case, duty to others would be self to society or self to another person, and that the relationship includes a sense of who you are and what you stand for, which is connected, I think, to the values. And the questions that came after that were, is identity something that I choose? Like, hey, I made a list of all the things that I could be. And then I decided for rational reasons or maybe emotional reasons that, I'm going to select that identity. Is identity something you can choose? Or is it something that you make as the sum total of all your actions in the world? That as you go through life and you do this and then you do that, that you are accumulating identity as an end result or a product of all the things that you do in the settings in which you did them. So your identity is something you make as you grow. So it's never the same as it was yesterday because I've now done new things. Or is identity something that you discover through introspection and you get through all the layers from the surface down to those roots and you say, oh, I seem to be this kind of person, and it's not a choice, but it is an act of discovering oneself. So that's, I don't have any answer on that. I know where my spider sense is leading me towards. I think it's a combination. It feels like it's that second and third one, in the sense that I recognize that the choices I make each day are redefining or adding to the definition of identity that I am. But also there feels like some root level values that I could not choose to get rid of. And I don't know if I made a choice to have them. I have to explore that more. But it is certainly not a rational choice model where I just said, I talked to 7 smart people and they said these were identities I could take on. So at the root level, that's what I'm now aware that I have to reflect on as a result of our discussion of values and leadership and organization. So duty and identity were the two values that came immediately to the surface for me this morning. So what do you think about that, Mr. Protreptic Guide?
No, I think that first of all, I think that it is a very hard answer where things are coming from, because is it possibly that we actually just can, pick some values and say this is our identity? I think a big part of the protreptic is also that that we are a body in the world, and we are part of a longer story, and history, and we have parents and grandparents and so on. So I think, as you said, it's a combination. And I was just thinking about the whole concept. You have this poster, this image in the back, and I was thinking about the concept of Zen Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, which is somehow getting rid of the ego, the feelings, the sentient being stuff, and to enter, I don't know, to a different, I don't know, true mindset or something. So I think there's a lot of ways into it, and I believe that we should be open for different approaches to it. You can use storytelling, of course, as a way, sharing stories, but what I have experienced in organization is that the good thing about the protreptic, when you are in an organization, there's a lot of stories. And when I coach people, leaders, I have coached 2 leaders this morning. They always start with a story, some kind of challenge, and but beneath every story, every action, you can say there's a value or a concept. So when I coach people and they are in their own storytelling, going around and round around, I look for what kind of values, what kind of concepts. And also, if I'm in a group and I try, to ask into that value, it can be trust. And in that sense, you can almost say that the protreptic Ole Fogh Kirkeby, he said it's like pulling up, a wine bottle like this. So you pull yourself up from the everyday storytelling going on, and people can meet on a common ground, because there's no right answer to these concepts. It's a way where we can explore them together, and in that philosophical reflection, somehow people, they get a greater understanding for their own value, but also for others somehow. And Ken, I just want to go back to the duty thing. I think that's also a big part of the protreptic, because it is that you have it's not only about you, and it's not only about your feelings. This is a way to actually, you can also ask a protreptic question, which is I often use as the first one. You can ask, why is duty important for my life and for my work as a leader?
Yeah.
And
Well, I'm going to take that one on as my follow-on homework assignment from lesson number 1. I'm going to add the identity to that, and I'm going to explore both of those ideas in a reflection, which I will send to you. And I want to sort of end this session and step outside of our conversation, just to observe how gracefully Jens sidestepped my hidden invitation to tell me the right answer. I invited him to, I gave him 3 choices about identity. Where does it come from and how do we get it? And he didn't say, oh, well, this is what identity is in the world, and you should adopt this point of view. But what he did was answered the question with a roundabout view of the world, of values and concepts and explorations, and why that and reinforce the message that there was no correct answer, but in this heightened atmosphere that requires trust. Well, we know from our true storytelling experience that safety, trust leads to truth and then leads to opportunities. But those first two preconditions, in my experience, have been important. That in order to trust, I must have a place of safety in order to let down my guard or let down barriers in the world. So safety and trust. Then we may be able to begin tentative discussions of the small t truth that we see. And then through shared dialogue and questioning, and we may come to a deeper perspective. So those are the two things I'm going to work on then, is the why is duty and why is identity important in my life. And I'm going to do my after I take a long walk, I'm going to take I'll do a learning journal entry on that. So I want to say much thanks to my good friend. And I'm going to end the recording piece here so we can talk more football and other things. But always great to see you, sir. And my intention is that I'm going to transcribe our discussions and then offer that to you as a sort of the next installment in the field guide to protreptic, because I believe that what we can do is have the embodied experience of protreptic first, and then sort of document the insights and the topics as the artifact. And that for protreptic to be genuine, it has to start in the embodied relationship in real time, and then follow up with the artifact to lock it in. So I think if we proceed on that basis, we'll be in pretty good shape. So let me go ahead and hit the unrecord piece, and then we can